Thanks, Marissa. Thank you, everyone, for being here, as well as those who will be watching this recording after the fact. I just want to say before we start, a big thank you all for stepping up to serve the fraternity as a section chair. I was a section chair for 4 terms in 2 different regions of the country, so I have been in your shoes, and I know the commitment that you all have signed up for. So thank you for volunteering or voluntolding to help support the fraternity and our students. We could not do this work without you, so many thanks. Tonight, as Marissa said, we're going to talk membership specifically focused around recruitment. And so we'll run through some different slides here, really just to kind of make sure everyone has a strong foundation around what recruitment looks like as we start looking at the fraternity of today and the fraternity of the next 100 years. With us celebrating our centennial this December, it's a really good opportunity to make sure that we're sharing best practices, ideas, and really helping educate where our students are at. Some of you, this may be your first time as a section chair. Some of you have been doing this before. We just really want to take this opportunity to give everyone kind of a strong foundation because we know how important this critical topic is. As we go throughout the session, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. And if you have anything to contribute, ideas or thoughts, would love to get those as well. So tonight, we're going to talk about membership and kind of what it is and why we do it. We're going to take a look at the membership cycle for our chapters. And then we're going to dive into the logistics of membership as it relates to recruitment. So setting a membership goal and a new member target, the tools that our chapters have to choose a type of recruitment and the process they use to go about doing that, and then how they implement a pledge or new member program. So a lot of content for an hour, so I'm just going to jump right in. So fundamentally, where I like to start with this conversation and where I'd like to start with this with our students is why membership is important. Membership is the foundation of the work we do. Without a strong and solid membership program, we cannot execute our programs of leadership, friendship, and service. Membership may not have the flash of a service project or a leadership development event. It may not feel as fun as a fellowship activity, but it is essential to who we are. If we don't recruit and bring members into the fraternity, over time we'll have less members and we'll be able to do less service on less campuses and in less communities. And so this work is foundational to who we are as an organization, and making sure our students understand that is essential. Our value proposition is at the core of what we do. And so as everyone here knows, our mission and vision is to create more inclusive communities for a more peaceful world, which we do by developing leaders, uniting members through friendship, and rendering service to all. And the reason that I always like to center this at the beginning is because this is what sets us apart as an organization. We do all 3 of these things. We talk a lot about this when we're talking recruitment strategies with students. We're not going to win on just the fellowship side. We're not going to out-fellowship traditional Greek life. We're not going to out-service different service organizations like a Habitat for Humanity, whose sole focus is to do service. But what sets us apart as an organization and as we look to bring people into the organization is that we're not just leadership, we're not just fellowship, we're not just service. We do all 3 of those things and we do them well. And that's our competitive advantage when it comes to recruiting college students against other organizations. Now, recruitment fundamentally is kind of the door and the first step of our membership journey. Recruitment exists so that we can give people the opportunity to join our organization. We specifically want to make opportunities for our potential new members to build relationships with all of our active members. And we also want to, on the flip side, create those opportunities for our active members to meet all of those potential new members. Everyone must be involved in recruitment. This is an idea that we've really centered over the last few years and that we think is foundational as we go forward for the fraternity. Is recruitment cannot be the job of just one person or one committee or one chapter officer. Everyone must have an investment in recruitment in order for us to be successful as an organization. And when we're doing our recruitment, we want to make sure we're recruiting across campus to a wide variety of folks of different backgrounds, different interests, and different experiences on our campus. Not everyone that we invite to join us will join right away, and that's okay. But every time we do recruitment, we're laying the groundwork for future opportunities for people to join.
Brandon,
Yes.
can we make a comment
Sure.
or statement? I had some experience with this competitive advantage. I was doing an Eagle Board of Review, and it's sort of one of the things we always ask is what's next and everything like that. And so I ended up talking to him about APO. Got excited. Got talking to his mother, and she says, "Oh yeah, he's thinking about a fraternity." And I was talking about particularly the service. She said, "Oh well, we have the fraternities already take care of that with the panel with their what do you call it? Oh, I had it before. The special uh, thing that they probably do once a year for a charity
Sure.
fundraising or helping." And the point I was trying to make to him is, hey, look, we're doing service throughout the year. It is one of our major focuses. So, in that way, we are not Greek, and Greek is one of the things we have to compete with.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Lawrence, because you're absolutely right. A lot of social Greek life does service, but not in the same way that we do, not throughout the year, not in an ongoing way. And that's something that truly sets us apart is you can get that Greek lettered experience and that social component, but you also get the service. You also get the opportunities for leadership development. And to your point, that's why we're different than rushing a traditional organization, and it's why we've been around for now a century. Thank you for sharing that, because that's exactly what we're talking about, right? Our value proposition in action. As I said before, recruitment is everyone's job. This isn't actually a quote from Frank Reed Horton, but why I'd like to talk about this here is that if we make recruitment just one person's job or one committee's job or one group's job, they're not truly understanding the full experience of what it means to be a part of the chapter. We are a brotherhood that is not just our entire chapter on campus, but spans multiple campuses across your section, across the region, and across the country. And so the more that our recruitment process matches what the active member experience can be, the more likely we are to paint that picture for students for them to know what they're signing up for and to be willing to commit. We don't want to just put our best foot forward, so to speak, and only have our really outgoing, energetic brothers leading recruitment and not creating a realistic picture of who's in the chapter, nor do we want to have a non-representative group represent us. Everyone is welcome. We have an open membership policy. And so let's not just put people who are good at talking to others or who are influencing or relationship builders at the center of our recruitment. Everyone must be a part of this. And so when we think about our membership journey, right, we can kind of break it into these 4 stages. We have kind of this potential new member, then the pledge or new member process, being an active brother, and then lastly, an alumni member. So when we think about our students and when they're working with recruitment, they're really focusing on kind of these first 2 boxes. So our potential new members are the ones that are experiencing the fraternity for the first time. They're the ones that we have to help understand what does the fraternity stand for and why should they join us, coming back to that value proposition. These are the questions that we have to have good answers to in order to convince people to join the fraternity. And so when we're working with our chapters, making sure they understand and can articulate what sets them apart from other organizations and what being part of a national fraternity means to them is super critical. As we work with our chapters and support them, and as we prepare for the fall, we want to make sure chapters have the right language and experiences to be able to share to illustrate their story. Every one of us has our own unique story for why we've joined the fraternity. And so we want to make sure that just as our students have those stories, they're prepared to share those examples and give those experiences. When they do that as part of that recruitment process, our hope is that they're able to convert those potential new members into pledges or new members. And so that initial period of commitment where they say, sure, I'm interested in joining the fraternity. Those pledges or new members can be really tentative about making that commitment, but often really excited about joining. They found something that they like, that resonates with them, that feels bigger than they are. And so there's a lot of excitement that can go into that, but also feelings of nervousness. For many college students, particularly today, one of the barriers that we see with recruitment is that our Greek letters often allow us to be painted with the same brush as social Greek organizations. And while there is some value in that on certain campuses, more often than not, this can be a detriment. And so our students need to understand not just what we stand for, but how we're different than social Greek organizations so that they can explain that to prospective new members. And when people start that pledge or new member period, we want to make sure that we're able to demonstrate that difference, truly what sets us apart. It's why we have things like the pledge or new member standards and our stance against absolutely no hazing, is we want to be clear from the get-go about what we stand for and put to rest any misconceptions student may have about joining us. From here, once a student pledges, they obviously then become that active brother who own the fraternity at every level of the organization. We as alumni volunteers will do a lot to work and support our students, but we have to remember that our students are the decision makers and are our key stakeholders. They're the ones that we're here to support and to serve. And so at that level, they have all control, but may have various degrees of comprehension. Oftentimes, students may not know how much they can do. We have seen this particularly in the last 5 years since the pandemic, a loss of institutional knowledge and experience from our chapters. And in this, students often don't know what they're empowered to change or not change, or what is required or not required. And so that's where, as a section chair, one of the biggest things that you can do to support membership growth in your chapters is empower them to make decisions that are different than their own experiences. Just because they went through rush or recruitment in a particular way doesn't mean they can't or shouldn't change that. We are champions of change who are here to support the long-term success of our chapters on our various campuses. And so it's important to make sure that as we're advocating, we're also providing that context, that bigger picture, and helping them connect those dots so they truly understand what recruitment and membership can look like on their campus. So that's a little bit kind of about membership fundamentally. I really want to dive into recruitment specifically and kind of the foundations of recruitment that we're looking for chapters to engage in, because one of the biggest changes that we've been pushing over the last few years as an organization is making sure that chapters are intentional with their recruitment. The pandemic taught us a lot, but one of the things it taught us is one or two bad recruitment cycles can really devastate a chapter membership and force chapters to close. And so we want to keep some of these things in mind so we can work to be proactive to prevent the loss of chapters on various campuses and in our communities. So first and foremost, we want to make sure our chapters are setting a direction and planning for their recruitment. And so before a chapter begins any part of planning their recruitment events or setting their timeline, we want chapters to determine their membership goal and their new member target. This should be done as part of the annual chapter evaluation process every year. For those who may be unfamiliar, the annual chapter evaluation process is relatively new over the last few years, but is largely a replacement to CAPS, the chapter assessment and planning session. We're not going to get super into the annual chapter evaluation tonight, but rest assured more resources and support to come in that area. But this is something that chapters are completing currently, and this is where they're setting their goals and evaluating their chapter operations. So as part of evaluating their chapter operations, we want them to identify their membership goal. And very simply, the membership goal is how many people does their chapter need in order to both survive and execute normal, sustainable operations on their campus. We don't have a national standard that says every chapter must be at least 20 students or 50 students. As you all know, our campuses are extremely diverse and different, ranging from 4-year large traditional flagship institutions to 2-year community colleges and even fully online institutions, as well as small private colleges and universities. And so there's no one size fits all approach to this question. But when we're working with our students, we want to make sure that we're having these discussions and that they're thinking about how many people does their chapter need to be successful. So if they do signature programs such as a merit badge university or a relay for life, if they want to host a section conference, if they want to raise money for a charitable organization or sponsor a leadership weekend on campus, they need people to do that. And what we've seen is so many chapters trying to do more and more with fewer and fewer people. And so, as chapters decide what their programming is going to look like for the year, we want them to assess how many people they need to execute that so that we have a North Star to anchor towards. Now, as I
Uh,
said, oh, yeah, go ahead, Lawrence.
uh, I'm listening to this, and I'm down to one chapter in my section, and I'm trying to build, rebuild, and all that kind of stuff. This challenge seems greatest for chapters in formation. I mean, you can say set a goal, but you know, it's more likely to be arbitrary because they really don't know uh, what kind of membership they're capable of.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And we're okay with that, right? Chapters are going to, this goal is going to change every semester, every year, and over time. So a chapter that may be, really small, 7 or 8 students with a bunch being able to graduate, they may have only known a small chapter. They may not know they could be a larger chapter and do more. We've seen a lot of chapters have drastic swings in size. Chapters that used to be 40 or 50 people now think they're comfortable at 12 to 15. There has been a large shift around how students view this. And so often the mentality of students and what we've seen as it relates to recruitment is let's go out and do our best, and the number of people we get is the number of people we get. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that approach, but it introduces a lot of risk into the chapter. And so we've really found that by encouraging students to think about the impact they want to make, how they're going to deliver service, leadership, and fellowship for their chapter, for their campus, and for their community, really reframes the conversation. So it's not, let's do our 3 rush events and hope we get enough people. It's, we need to go find enough people that we can do our merit badge weekend or our relay for life event, because those are things that are important to us as active members, and they're traditions of service that we want to continue with our chapter.
Brandon,
Yeah.
this is Mike Nathan. One of the things I tell my chapters here in North Florida is take a look at the OP. The OP has that information you're talking about.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm looking at is not so much the fall semester, but how many students are you going to lose at the end of April next year? Add 10% to that, and that's normally the goal that you want to set, or 10 or 15 additional brothers, and that's the goal that you want to set for the upcoming year. Now, you can take that all at one time for a small chapter. You may take that in 2 lumps, spring and fall, on larger chapters. I have a chapter here that came out of COVID that had 10 to 15 brothers at COVID. At the present time, they sit at 68 brothers. And this is what they do every year, is take a look at those numbers based upon the OP. I personally sit down with the presidents and go over the OP and the membership numbers that they can find. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's absolutely fantastic. And that's exactly where we're going with this, right? Once we know how many people the chapter needs, that lets us kind of start that conversation of how many do we have and how many are we going to lose? And so to your point, we actually have this resource right here for every chapter that does exactly what you're saying. I love that you're having these conversations with your chapters. That is phenomenal, and I wish every section chair and advisor would do that. If it were up to me, that would be what we do, because it's so important to have those conversations and help them through this process. But for all of our chapters, we do have this resource here that I want to make sure everyone is aware of, that helps them get to this point that Mike is describing here, right? So it starts with our how many active members do we have? How many are we going to be graduating or losing at the end of the year? Do we have folks who are leaving for other reasons? Maybe they're transferring or study abroad. And then how many members do we need in order to run our programs like we were talking about, right? And so the difference between how many people we're going to have at the end of the year once we graduate everyone out and lose folks, and the number that we need to do our programming, that's how many pledges or new members we need to bring in. And so we've developed this tool, which is available on the national website. I've included the link here for you, for chapters to be able to do exactly that. Plug those numbers in, and then from there, they can identify, depending on how often they're doing that recruitment intake process, how many people do they need to bring in each of those intake cycles. Because to your point, Mike, they may be only doing recruitment in the spring semester. Maybe they're doing recruitment in the fall and spring. Maybe they're doing multiple pledge classes in both semesters, and so they're doing 3 or 4 pledge classes in a year. This is kind of the starting point for them to figure out that number has to be where they begin. So thank you for sharing that best practice. And I would advise other section chairs to make sure you're having similar conversations with your chapters throughout the year. Cool. So once we decide how many people we need, we then need to choose the type of recruitment that we're going to do. And this is where we get into the idea of innovating our recruitment approaches. We have tried to reframe this conversation as an organization, because the way that we plan our intake cycles should be dictated based on how many people we're trying to recruit. If that number that we found out is we need to recruit 12 people this year, you recruit 12 people in the course of 1 year, maybe let's say 6 in the fall, 6 in the spring, that recruitment process looks a lot different than if you need to recruit 20 people or 40 people or 60 people or 3 people. The number of students that you need to bring in should be our first starting point. And then from there, we should choose the toolkit that best supports our chapter's ability to do that. And so we have 3 strategies we want to talk through tonight. As we go through each of these, I'm just going to highlight them here really quickly, and then we're going to talk about each of them. I would love if any of you have chapters who have executed any of these strategies, if you've seen chapters be successful with them, particularly some of these new ideas, would love to hear kind of what that has looked like. But we have 3 main strategies we're going to talk through. The one-wave intake, which is our tool that we use to sustain our membership at our current levels. The multi-wave intake, which is how we're going to grow our chapter and boost their size. And our continuous intake, which is really our break glass focus on membership option so that the chapter doesn't fold. Chapters should always choose the right tool that's available based on what their membership goal and new member target is, not just the type of recruitment they've done in the past. We want them to think about this year over year so they can pick the right tool that gets the job done. And so we'll start with our one-wave intake, our sustaining membership approach. This is the approach that most brothers over the last 100 years have been familiar with. This is where a chapter will typically do that 1 to 2 weeks of recruitment, or that rush week at the start of a semester, and then do the subsequent new member process where we have those pledge or new member requirements, meetings, and expectations before we initiate at the end of the semester. This approach is really good for chapters that have a healthy, strong membership and are looking to sustain that. So our focus during that isn't to increase the size of the chapter to do more, it's to make sure that we're replenishing the membership that we're going to be losing so we can continue operations at a consistent size. So a chapter that's between 20 and 30 in size for a small to medium campus, or 50 to 70 on a larger campus, this could be a great approach because those chapters aren't necessarily at risk of closing due to low membership. And so the benefits to this approach, first and foremost, is familiarity. This is what most of our chapters have seen for most of the fraternity's existence. And because we just do one intake in a semester, this allows the chapter to focus on doing a small number of high quality recruitment events, events that center our value proposition and demonstrate leadership, friendship, and service, because membership growth is not necessarily the sole focus. There's an understanding by the chapter they need to bring new people in so they can sustain their size. But once they do that recruitment process, the focus switches back to executing high value programs of leadership, friendship, and service for their chapter on campus and in the community. And so this is what most chapters have historically experienced. Now, the reason this is best for healthy chapters is that it does carry risk. If a chapter underperforms during recruitment, there's not as much ability to capture those people back later. And potential new members who learn about the fraternity after that intake cycle are less likely to join us. The example that I'll use here really quick is for chapters that do spring recruitment. So let's say they do pledging in January, February. If someone doesn't learn about the fraternity until March, they may have to wait until September to be able to join us. And in that 6 months, they may find a new home on campus, a different organization that they can readily join. And so it may lose our ability to recruit that member for good. I want to turn it over to some thoughts here.
Yeah. So a lot of colleges have a student involvement fair or student organization fair. How well do you think that fits into this strategy?
It is a great question. Actually, I was just talking to Marissa about that the other day. We think every chapter, regardless of size, regardless of campus type, should be involved in that campus activities or organizations fair, whether that's at the start of the year, whether that's twice a year. All of these models we're going to talk through have different strategies tied to them. But if you're going to have an opportunity to say, here are all of the student organizations you can choose from, Alpha Phi Omega must be at the table for that. We have to make sure students know that we are an option and that we are something they should be choosing. Now, it's important that that's not our only way they learn about us and their only opportunity to join. And so every chapter should engage in that type of program, but that's just the beginning of where that recruitment journey begins.
Would you expect that there would be like an organizational information meeting for the people who have expressed interest so that you can describe the organization in more detail?
It's a good question. Yes, and is what I'll say there. We're never gonna, in a 30-second elevator pitch at an org fair, we're never gonna be able to truly explain everything about who we are as an organization. And so we have to have follow-up conversations to encourage people to learn more about us and to better talk to them about what we stand for. That said, I personally am not a strong proponent of just standalone meetings by themselves in terms of the organizational or the informational meeting. And what I mean by that is if we want to do an information session, let's do it as part of a leadership event, fellowship event, service event, right? We can have that informational meeting that so many chapters have historically done, but we can tie that into a guest speaker from campus, a fellowship opportunity, and a service project all in that same session, right? And so it doesn't have to be just one more lecture for students to show up to. It can be a robust event that offers them the opportunity not just to learn about the organization, but to engage in some of our programming. Any other thoughts here? Awesome. So this is a tool that most of our chapters use, and this will be the one that most of your chapters you're supporting will have seen before. What we want to do is make sure that you all as section chairs have the foundation to support them in some of our other membership recruitment approaches as well, because this tool is not ideal for every chapter. For chapters that are potentially at risk of closing or that are really small in size that need to focus on membership growth, there's two other tools in their belt that we want to talk through. So the first of those is our multi-wave intake cycle, or idea of growing. This is very similar in principle to the idea of that single wave process we just talked about. So they start with that rush week at the beginning of the year, and they'll do that new member process. The difference is we don't have to wait until next semester to do another intake cycle. So if we think back about our initial example about setting a new member target, let's say we're a smaller chapter and we want to recruit 25 members this year. So that way we can replace not just our graduating seniors, but so that we can grow. Because maybe our chapter is only 15 and we're going to graduate out 6 or 7. But we want to be larger so that way we can do more things on campus and have a larger impact. This is a great tool for those chapters because instead of saying, here's our shot at the start of the fall or here's our shot at the start of the spring, if someone misses that window, we're giving another opportunity for them to join. By doing recruiting throughout the year and maybe more in the middle of the semester, in addition to the beginning of the semester, we give ourselves potentially 2 or 3 times as many opportunities to bring folks in. Lawrence mentioned the recruitment fair at the beginning of the semester, and the multi-wave actually can give us a really competitive advantage here. Many first-year students will go to the organization fair and sign up for clubs and activities that sound interesting to them. But what the data shows us in higher education is so many of them don't click with that one that they signed up for. They signed up for that organization, it wasn't a good fit, and now they've missed the window to go sign up for something else. By doing recruitment intentionally after that time, in addition to during, we can often be the only organization that's actively bringing new people into the chapter and publishing and publicizing our recruitment events, which gives us an opportunity to say, hey, if you signed up for something else at the organization fair and it didn't work out, come join us. You haven't missed the window. You don't have to wait till next year to learn that we exist and we're recruiting. And it's a flexible strategy. When we talk about this multi-wave tool, and I'll show you a visual demonstration here in a moment, when we talk about planning maybe a 2-wave cycle of intake, this is something where we lay the plan out and we say we're going to do recruitment at the beginning and let's say at fall break, because we have to get 20 people this spring semester or our chapter is going to reduce in size. If we get 20 people in that January intake that we do, we don't have to do the intake later on in the year. We can kind of just pass on doing that. As opposed to the flip side, if we need to get 20 people this semester and we only get 10, if we haven't already planned that second recruitment cycle, it can be very hard to plan that on the fly, which means our chapter may not meet their membership goals. And so planning is really intentional and important when we're talking about this tool. That said, that can be the downside. Many chapters may struggle with planning this because they've never seen it before and they've never done it before. It also can create the perception that there's more administrative work. One of the pieces of feedback we've received from chapters that have been doing this is that they have to track kind of 2 separate pledge classes throughout the semester. And we can mitigate that by combining those pledge classes as soon as we bring that second group in. And what I mean by that is this example here that I have. So this is a framework that we have developed conceptually, and then actually a handful of chapters are using this specific model to do their recruitment. And so what this looks like is that at the start of the semester, we do our rush week. Maybe this is our student activities fair. We do our initiation ceremony to start that process. And then where you see modules, these are the pledge education modules from the Introduction to Alpha Phi Omega handbook. So this is where we're actually educating them in those pledge renew member meetings. And so in a normal process, we just do this first column where we say, hey, we're going to do rush, we're going to do our pledge education, and then we're going to induct you into the chapter. In this two-wave cycle, as we get throughout the semester, we use another rush week to give another opportunity to bring people into the chapter. When we do that, we combine these pledge education opportunities together. And so we don't keep our two pledge classes completely separate. Rather, this second pledge class jumps right into the education work and the requirements of the first pledge class, and then they just make up those requirements at the end of the semester. And so this does require pre-planning, but it allows us to get additional folks in. Chapters that have used this approach in the last couple of years have on average recruited an additional 25% compared to their initial pledge class. So we've seen chapters where they've said, hey, we only got 10 people. They've ended up getting another 3 or 4 people during that second pledge class. And so it gives us an opportunity to do additional recruitment. And so this is an example tool that we want to provide, but we have both kind of a 2 intakes in a semester and a 3 intakes in a semester approach that we have shared with chapters. Again, these are starting points. And so this isn't just copy paste. Chapters can and should modify these tools as they see fit. But the conversation that we want to share with you all is making sure that our chapters know that unless their university or institution prohibits it, they can recruit multiple times in one semester if that makes sense for them and if their membership focus is to grow. And so I want to, oh yeah, go ahead.
I take it that the modules don't necessarily build on one another. So you can do 4 and you're not going to feel lost because 1 and 2 and 3 prepared you for 4.
Exactly right. These are kind of the core. This has been redone within the last few years and is continually being retooled. But these are kind of the aspects of our Pledge Your New Member education that we feel are required or should be required, as well as for chapter education for extension efforts. So, for example, I think, modules, and I might get the numbers wrong, but modules 3, 4, and 5, for instance, one is leadership, one is fellowship, one is service, right? So they're dedicated to understanding our cardinal principle, how that applies to the fraternity, how the chapter brings that to life. So in that service module, they learn about our 4 fields of service, about our national service partners, about the chapter's specific service program, and how to plan and execute a service event. But that isn't a prerequisite to going through the content about leadership development programming, fellowship programming, fraternity history and traditions. These are all things that we think are foundational knowledge pieces that every one of our students should have. But that's why we have that pledge process, is for them to learn that over the course of that time. We don't think it should be a prescribed requirement that they complete that in a linear fashion. Does anyone work with a chapter that is currently using a multi-wave recruitment approach? I don't know with the folks we have tonight if anyone has one of those chapters.
I do.
Sure.
So I'm section F4, the Chicago cities chapters.
Oh yeah.
And I believe it was at the last national convention, University of Illinois Chicago, UIC, went to, I believe it was one of your workshops about this specifically. And they implemented it in the last year, maybe the last year, like last 2 years, like essentially since the last convention, and they had great success. They were one of the chapters that really struggled after COVID with graduating members and then just not being active on campus like they used to be, and like figuring out what post-COVID college life kind of looked like. And so they were really struggling number wise, and they have steadily grown back to about where they were, I think, pre-COVID, maybe a little shy, but have really cultivated like a good group of people. And so they found that like having the multi classes was kind of annoying or like difficult for the pledge master or the new member coordinators at the beginning, but once they had like a semester under their belt of trying it, they found ways that worked for them. So they've done really well. and it's been great for them. So yeah.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Liz. I didn't
Yeah.
realize they were your chapter, but like when I think of chapters
Yeah.
who have done this, they are one that always comes to the top of mind.
Yeah. I
Because they have
think,
done such a good job.
yeah, they did it. I don't think they did it this past spring, but they've done it at least during their fall, because fall is their major, where they get the most new members. And so they've done it, I want to say the last two fall semester, or like, yeah, the last two fall semesters, with pretty good success. So yeah, it really helped them a lot.
Thank you for sharing that.
So
Yeah, of course.
I like, if you're going to have a sectional or something like that, have a session where they present about best practice, their experience that might help other. And I think you're smiling because you've already done this.
They have definitely talked to other chapters in our section, and they've talked to other chapters at sectionals. So we do like a whole, like, basically we do like a whole region conference just because of the way that Illinois is split up usually for our section conferences. And so I know that they've talked to other chapters about this. So they've kind of done it informally, but I'm sure they would definitely be happy to share their experiences on a larger scale too.
I'd say peek behind the curtain. We are hoping to, including this chapter, but there are a few others. We are hoping this fall to actually kind of do some moderated Q&A with some different chapters doing some different things like this to really let them share their story, capture that, and kind of provide that as an institutional fraternity resource. So something that could be provided on demand, but also, shared over time as well, for chapters to really talk about it. Because as much as I can sit here and talk to you all about this, we all know students learn best from other students and from their peers. And so that's one of our hopes for the fall, is to really platform some of those chapters doing some really cool things in recruitment in all stages of this, right? Not just this multi-wave recruitment, but also our traditional and our continuous model. So be on the lookout for more of that coming soon. So we've talked through two of those approaches, and so I do want to move on to our last approach here, so that way we can be cognizant of our time. But this is our continuous intake model, or what we call our membership focus. Those of you who have historically had experience working with extension efforts will be likely familiar with this type of intake because it's very similar, if not identical. But similar to the other approaches, we typically have the chapters start that recruitment at the beginning of the year and then do that subsequent new member process. But after they do that rush week process, we are just continually allowing folks to join. We're not giving them arbitrary dates or windows where they can join or rush, but rather, if they want to join, great, come to our next meeting and jump right in to the pledge your new member process. This is really focused for chapters who are at risk of closure. So if you have a chapter that's less than 10, this is a tool that we recommend breaking out for that chapter so that they are able to continue providing a legacy for years to come. It lets us get people into the chapter quick, which is the biggest benefit, is that we don't lose people to other organizations. We don't have them jump through a bunch of hoops. What we typically see with chapters that use this model is that they stop doing two types of events. They stop doing events for the chapter and events for recruitment, and just everything they do is a recruitment event. So if we're having a chapter meeting and we're doing pizza during it, it's now also a fellowship recruitment event. If we're doing a service project, it is open to the campus community, and if someone comes, it is a recruitment event. And so the focus here is to keep chapters alive. The biggest barrier to this is it requires chapters to really think through and prioritize what is important. When chapters use this model, we recommend kind of pulling out all of their requirements and expectations, strip back requirements around service hours, leadership hours. What do we expect from our actives and from our pledges? Not because it's not important to have expectations, and not because it's important to, quote unquote, lower our standards. That's not what we're doing. But for chapters that are really small, we think if they normally require, let's say 12 or 15 hours of service in a semester, if we cut that back to 4 hours or 5 hours, we're going to do less service in the moment, but if we can focus on membership and get our chapter back up, we'll be able to do service for the next 5, 10, or 20 years, as opposed to keeping higher requirements now. And then our chapter gets so overwhelmed between trying to do recruitment and all their other activities that they're unable to successfully execute either, and we lose the chapter. There is a significant mindset shift to get to this model because students build based off their own experiences. And so this is very different than what most of them have seen unless they've been through that extension process. And so there can be a struggle to get here. But I would say if you have a chapter that is at risk of closing at the end of the academic year, this is absolutely the method that we should be working with the chapter to try and pivot towards so they can bring in more people. They can always up their service expectations or their membership education program as they continue to grow, but we want to keep the chapter alive so they can provide service for years to come. And I'll go ahead and pause there because I see a couple hands.
Hi, I'm Annalie from Section 04.
Hi.
The question that I have, and you kind of alluded to it, was what does the new member education process kind of look like when we're doing continuous intake? Because in the other models we had, week one in different modules, but obviously that's not going to work here. So that I think that's a stumbling block for me in just having conversations with some of my chapters about it and what that might look like for them.
For sure. Thank you for asking that question. When I think about the membership education, right, the biggest thing that stands out that's different about this model is if you're using continuous, I recommend that the chapter not have standalone pledge or new member meetings. We're used to this model of we have a chapter meeting, we have an exec board meeting, and then the pledges have their own meeting. There's no rule that says that needs to be separate. And so for chapters that are this small, likely if they're doing recruitment and they're 5 to 7 people, they're also all likely to be big brothers and helping with the new member education process anyway. And so just incorporate that into a chapter meeting.
Okay.
In terms of educating, right? Anytime we do a service project is an opportunity to do the requisite pledge education around that service module, right? And so much of the content that we want our pledges to learn is about understanding the principles and history and traditions of the organization and how that applies to them. And so that's largely discussion based and conversation and reflectional. And so there's really cool opportunities to do this in an active chapter setting where it's not just pledges learning and engaging in those discussions, but giving active members the opportunity to reflect on those reasons as well and re-find their spark. Because what we also find is that in most of these smaller chapters that need this approach, the folks who are left are tired and burnt out and are just there because they've been there and they're going to be graduating soon. And so by doing this as an entire chapter and pledge class, we can also help reignite that passion and that why for our actives as well.
That's very helpful in making it like part of their chapter meetings and all of the other things they do. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question. By the little hand numbers, I think Jinx, you're next.
Hi, I'm from section D2. I had a comment and a question.
Sure.
So my chapter that I just graduated from actually did continuous intake, and something that we utilized was like when new members would join the pledge process kind of later in the semester, we had them go back and we had made kind of slideshow presentations that they could click through on old modules and fill out a worksheet, including those like reflection questions, and then bring them back to the chapter and discuss what they learned. And so that was really helpful so that to make sure that they still were able to learn the stuff that was already went over. So that's something that other chapters might be able to use.
Thank you
and
for
then
sharing
my
that.
question was about, is there ever a point, do you think that continuous intake like wouldn't work anymore, like where a chapter gets too big and it's no longer helpful to the chapter? Or do you think continuous intake could work for chapters that are bigger also?
I love that question as a side note. So thank you for asking that. That like gets me excited. I think this model can be used for a chapter of any size. I think the logistics become a little bit harder to execute this the larger the chapter gets, right? If you are, a chapter of, 5 or 10 and you're bringing in, let's say 10 to 15 pledges, that's an environment where everyone can still get to know each other and still have that dynamic. If you're a chapter of 50 doing continuous intake, it starts to be a little bit harder to make sure you're providing that quality experience where everyone is able to be a part of that process. I would never tell a chapter in most circumstances, I would never say you are too big for this model. But I think at some point, right, if you're doing this type of recruitment and you're a medium or larger chapter, you could be getting 50 to 100 pledges in a semester if every brother brings one new member in, right? And so that could be awesome, but that does create a little bit of an administrative burden, perhaps, to then have to track that many people. So as long as the chapter has the right systems and structures in place to scale that, you could do this as a chapter of 300. It would just take a lot of planning, organization, and creativity to make sure the entire chapter is on the same page. So the short answer is any chapter can do this approach, and I welcome it. We have an open membership policy. Let's not put timing constraints on people's ability to join the organization. But there is some risk that just needs to be planned through.
Brandon, we also have a chapter in Texas that is a good example of continuous recruitment at any size.
Yeah.
And not by choice of the chapter. They were put in a situation because of their campus administration moving away from pledging as a concept entirely. And the new understanding of joining an organization was if you want to join, you have the opportunity to join. So the chapter very quickly pivoted and created somewhat of a cornerstone program for all of their other student organizations that included this idea of holistic member education. So the conversations and the education that new members were having, active members, whether they were there for a semester, 2 or 3, were also part of those pieces of education. So everybody at the same time was continuing the conversation, continuing to learn even these foundational elements all at the same time. So, the question of, is a chapter ever too big to outgrow this model? Brandon's absolutely right. It's possible that when a chapter gets to a roadblock of, hey, this is getting really hard, maybe they outgrew their shoes and they need to adjust the operations and practices that they're familiar with to better fit their new campus environment.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that chapter, Marissa.
Brandon, this is Mike Nathan again.
Yeah.
I got one chapter up here. My job is not September through June. It's year round. I have to remind one of my chapters that they must, and I emphasize must, get with the school administration and go through the recruitment environment that the school puts on. Otherwise, they are not allowed to recruit on campus for the entire year, not one semester, the entire year. So
Yeah.
It behooves us to get with our chapters even over the summer. Just like right now, July 31st is coming up, and we have to be on our chapters to get the paperwork in because convention's coming up that they
Absolutely.
need to get in. But again, that's one of the chapters I have. The other thing is I have another chapter here in North Florida that recruitment is done also during the summertime by the chapter because orientation is done during the summertime. So there are recruitments during orientation, and there's 1 or 2 big recruiting orientation, and then one right after the semester starts. So you got to keep on your chapters and understand what their programs are and what their recruitments on their college, on the campuses are.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that, Mike. I really, two things I want to make sure everyone takes away from that, right? One is recruitment can be year round as long as the campus allows it. Summer orientation is one of the best opportunities to get our name out there and to get students aware of us even before they start. And I think the most important thing you said there, right, is making sure students are connecting with campus regularly. They have to understand what the university's requirements and restrictions are around recruitment, because as many great ideas as we've talked about tonight, many of you will work with campuses where they are only permitted to recruit in certain windows, in certain ways, to certain students, or in certain times of year. And so our students have to understand those restrictions because those come first. So thank you, Mike, for calling that piece out. Liz, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share my experience because my home chapter actually had to do this. And so right before I became section chair, my home chapter at Elmhurst University went down to one member, one brother, because
Mm-hmm.
of COVID, in uh, other issues and things like that. And so what the section chair at the time did was reach out to alumni. And Chicagoland area is very fortunate that a lot of our alumni stay close. So I know this isn't for everywhere and every type of university, but I just wanted to recommend that reaching out to alumni who have just graduated or have graduated, a couple years since, because essentially what we did was we had this continuous intake of new members. We worked with the one brother who became our de facto president and ran the like chapter part of the meetings, but we did the combined new member chapter meeting kind of plan. And so she would get the experience of, okay, I'm a president. This is kind of what I have to do. These are my responsibilities. And she grew in that way. And then the alumni, we had two, like one or two that would come to every meeting and for like do the recruit, like the new member kind of side of things and talk about, we went through all the modules and did that kind of thing. And so I just wanted to recommend if you have a chapter that is putting this in place because of, having only one or two members, to don't forget to reach out to alumni because there's hopefully someone in the area, even if they can just zoom in or something like that. But that was really helpful, and they were able to bring the chapter back to semi-normal, numbers, and was able to like resume like a quote unquote typical chapter and recruitment and whatnot. And it worked. So it was really nice.
Yep.
And the biggest hurdle was was because we did have to change requirements and things like that, was making sure they understood that these requirements are just temporary and that once the semester is over, normal bylaws kind of, and it was a great way to introduce the bylaws and be like, these are the
Yeah.
actual rules. And if you want to change things, this is how you do it. So like it was a great tool to utilize that. But that was like the biggest, not that the hours and requirements were that drastically different, but like when you get used to something for a semester and then they're like, oh wait, why did it all change? Like what the heck? So like that was the biggest kind of like hurdle for them, but it all worked out and they're doing well now. So I just wanted to share that experience as well.
Absolutely. And thank you, Liz, for sharing that. I know there are a number of chapters that have been in that similar situation. And I think that's one thing I would say with an asterisk for you all as section chairs is alumni can be a powerful resource to support chapters. We just need to make sure it's done in an intentional and supportive way. And again, I know the chapter you're talking about, and I know exactly what you all did in that situation to make sure it was great. But just a reminder to everyone that you can be that support resource that helps connect those alumni. We just need to make sure the students are continuing to center their experience and lead that chapter as they do, which I know they did in this situation. I just wanted to call that out. I want to be really cognizant of our time because we are coming up at the end here. So I just want to wrap up with a couple quick items here. But thank you all so much for the discussion tonight. We did highlight kind of these three different strategies for intake, with the recommendation and the idea being chapters should pick the tool that fits their unique needs, not just the one they've always done. So by setting that membership goal and that new member target, they can look at how many people do we need to bring in and then pick the strategy that works best for that type of recruitment. I would be remiss if I didn't talk briefly just about the new member process. The new member process is just as important as recruitment. It doesn't do us any good to get 100 people in the door during recruitment, only to lose 95 of them during that new member process because of the requirements or expectations. And so when we think about that process, we want to make sure we're preparing our new members for the responsibilities of active membership, which starts by asking, what do we expect of our active members, so that we can build a program that helps prepare them for those obligations. The new member process should be intentional and deliberate, and every component of the process should have a specific intentional outcome that prepares our new members for active membership. If it doesn't, it does not belong as part of the new member process. We want to ask the questions of, why should this requirement belong in our program? Not why should we take it out? Just because we've always done it isn't the reason to include it. So we want to flip that question and say, what value does this add? Why are we doing this? And what message do I send to my pledges by requiring them to do that, or by not requiring them to do certain things? Lastly, before we wrap up, I did just want to highlight some resources around recruitment for you all and for your chapters. So the National Pledge or New Member Standards are super critical and something that every chapter needs to ensure they're in compliance with when planning their recruitment pledge education. The chapter same page guide and chapter builder deck offer strategies and best practices that can allow students to execute the recruitment programming that makes sense for them. 7 tips to step up recruitment, innovating recruitment and new member education, and our Back to Basics Recruitment 101 are 3 resources you can find on the national website here that are designed specifically for our students in terms of thinking through everything from how do I even start planning a recruitment event to how do I innovate and choose one of these newer tools that I may be unfamiliar with. Elevator speeches that make an impact and recruiting with crucial conversations are also 2 great resources that highlight the importance of those interpersonal conversations, the sharing of our stories, and the describing of our own experiences have in recruiting people to our organization. And so we highly encourage chapters to check those out. The last 2 resources I have for you are 2 live webinars that we're going to be hosting this fall. These are student focused, though you all are welcome to attend, but we encourage you to include these to communications with your students so that students can be a part of those conversations. We will have a membership roundtable on August 21st. This is specifically set up to be prior to the start of many academic years or right at the beginning, so chapters can ask questions, discuss strategies, and learn best practices from other chapters before they start fall recruitment. And then we do have an event the week of September 10th. It's also at 7 p.m. Central Time. For those who do not know, we have redesigned the Pledge Program of Excellence, starting with this upcoming academic year. So the current PPOE application is due July 31st. As Mike said, please remind your chapters to submit their paperwork. But we are rolling out a new version of this, which will start this fall, August 1. Those details have been given to region chairs. So if you have not received those, I encourage you to reach out to them so you can learn a little bit more about that. And we'll be presenting this to students and alumni in September. And then lastly, just one kind of request or suggestion for folks as far as next steps go. As we start thinking about the fall, and as Mike said, as we start following up with our chapters and getting them ready, we do have a couple things that we feel over the next 30 days, we encourage all of our section chairs to discuss with their chapters, or at least reach out to start these conversations. So if your chapters have not already started planning for fall, we want to understand that. And as their section chair, understanding when they're going to start planning those preparations is important. We know oftentimes if they wait too long or start too late in planning, they can lose out on opportunities to reserve premium visibility on campus. They can miss opportunities for signature events, such as helping with move-in or orientation weekends, and they may lose the ability to recruit certain people if they don't plan with the campus early enough. Some have already started, some may not have. So we encourage you to understand and support your chapters in beginning that process. and make sure that chapters have that membership goal and new member target. As we said, the type of intake tool they use should be based on their measurable goals for how many people they need to recruit. And so if they haven't already defined how many people they need to bring in, we do have resources, including that worksheet we looked at before, with how to figure out how many people to recruit. And then once they do that, help them understand from these different tools we've talked about tonight, which one may help them. Especially for chapters that may be moving to the multi-wave or the continuous, if you feel that they need to make that transition, our hope is that tonight's conversation lays the groundwork for you to start those discussions with your chapter so you can help champion those new approaches so that they can grow their membership for years to come. And then lastly, as you're reaching out and collecting some of this information, we do recommend compiling that and sharing it with your region chair as we begin planning our recruitment for the fall. I know we are a few minutes over, but I do just want to say one more time, a big thank you to everyone for joining us tonight and for those who are watching this recording that were not able to attend. And I'll turn it over to Marissa to close us out.